Hi, welcome everybody. Good evening. My name is Grace Meadows, and I am a music therapist by training, and I am delighted to be here for our second Music Mondays session. And today we are joined by clinical psychologist Gemima Fitzgerald, who some of you may know very well. It's lovely to have you with us, Gemima. Thank you so much for joining us and being here and sharing your expertise with us. Would you like to tell our viewers a little bit about you?
Oh, thank you, Grace. It's lovely to be here. Yes, my name's Gemima Fitzgerald. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've worked with Dementia Carers Count now since 2017, so a long time that I've been involved with the charity, and I have a real my doctoral research was around resilience. So resilience is how we cope with stress and adversity in life, how we can learn from it and even grow through it, even when life is really, really tough. And I'm particularly interested in how that applies to family carers of people with dementia, because obviously that is a lot of adversities involved in that, and it's a really challenging time. So yeah, it's great to be here today.
Well, you're just the perfect person for tonight then. So we're going to be talking about Tracks of My Tears. So we'll get into that in a moment. But just before we do that, we will be answering questions in our final session. So that's our fifth one coming up in 3 weeks' time. But if you do have any questions, please do send them to us. We are happy to answer them in the week, in between sessions. The other thing that we'd really love you to do is make sure you share your songs with us, because we'd love to put together a playlist of all the songs that you enjoy. And if you'd like to share the story or the meaning behind why that song or piece of music is important to you, we'd love to hear that too. But any questions, do just get in touch with us. We're very happy to answer those and support you with that. But tonight, we're just really excited to hear from Gemima. So we're going to be looking at how music can help decrease mental and physical pain, anxiety, fatigue, and depression. Before we get to the music bit, Gemima, I thought it might be useful for us just to share a sort of very top level kind of insight into what that all means, because that's a lot bunched together there in terms of mental and physical pain, anxiety, fatigue, and depression. That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, we know that, as part of being a human being is experiencing, difficult times. Most of us don't go through life just sailing through it. And as human beings, we experience such a range of emotions, and some of those emotions are difficult to bear, others are more pleasant. And so when times are tough, and certainly for family carers of people with dementia, that when you're under a lot of strain, you can feel really stressed. So you might feel that you are overloaded and you don't have the internal or practical resources to cope with what you're going through. And that can have a real effect on your mood. And some of that is kind of just dependent on just your circumstances. And it's a really normal reaction to going through really hard times. And people cope with stress in lots of different ways. Some people know that they're feeling very low in mood. They might be tearful. They might even be depressed. So that, very quickly, the definition of clinical depression is to experience symptoms of low mood, tearfulness, lack of motivation, loss of pleasure in things that you used to enjoy for over 2 weeks. So that's not actually that long. But for family carers, sometimes people are depressed, but sometimes it's more of just a reaction to the really difficult circumstances. And if those circumstances change, they would feel better. But it's because of what they're going through. And sometimes people just feel numb and they don't feel anything. And I suppose the most important thing to say, and the same goes for fatigue. Some people feel really fatigued, some people don't. But the most important thing is about self-awareness, to kind of check in with yourself and think, well, how am I? Am I feeling different than how I was, say, a few weeks ago, a few months ago? How am I doing? And to kind of take the time to notice that, because as carers, often, our own needs get really pushed down. And it's the last thing we think about. We're always thinking about everybody else. So it's really important to just check in with yourself and think, well, how am I? How am I being affected? Because you will be being affected. It's just, how are you being affected?
And absolutely. And it's that permission to check in with yourself and to say, it's absolutely okay for me to have needs, for me to have feelings, for these feelings to not be amazing feelings. And for me to feel a certain way about something, and that's okay.
And lots of carers say, I don't feel like myself anymore, or they might say, oh, it's selfish to think about myself, I don't have time for that. But it's a case of, okay, well, it's not selfish to check in with yourself. It's really important. If you go under, you're not going to be any good to anyone else, and you're important too. You're a human being. So I would definitely recommend it.
Amazing. Well, I think that gives us a really good starting point for us to think about what happens when we put music in the mix, then, to try and reduce or ameliorate or counter some of those physical and mental symptoms around pain and anxiety and depression. What do we mean? What's going on in the brain and the body when we put music in the mix to try and alleviate some of that?
It's amazing, isn't it, music? I mean, culturally, throughout the whole world, people's brains respond to music. It doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what culture you are a part of or what your background is, people's brains are affected, and that's the whole brain. Every part of the brain tends to be affected when we listen to music. And the evidence, the psychological evidence about how music positively affects our brains is so strong. There's a lot of evidence about it, as you probably know. I'm sure you know loads about it, Grace. It's what we know is it's really good for, first of all, for our mood, and listening to music can reduce cortisol, so that's the stress hormone in our bodies. So it's really good for reducing stress. It can be really good for increasing dopamine, which is the hormone the neurotransmitter that we need for motivation. So often carers say, I just don't feel motivated. I feel like I can't even be bothered to get up in the mornings. That's really common when we're feeling low. So it's really good. It's really good for that. It helps us to feel that we can tolerate pain more. So they've done research about how if you listen to music and you put your hand into really freezing ice cold temperatures, people can last in that ice cold temperature for a lot longer if they're listening to music. So there's so many things about how we tolerate discomfort and pain. And it's really good for our mood. It helps us. It's a source of pleasure. We know that it's just a natural thing, that you don't need a psychologist to tell you that like listening to music often can cheer us up, but I suppose also what's important is a type of music that we listen to as well, which we can talk about.
Absolutely. And when you talk about those neurotransmitters, and like there's a whole kind of conversation we could have about the chemical reactions that are happening in the brain when we are experiencing music, but that translates physically, doesn't it? So those messages, I was thinking about the reduction in the cortisol. We know that then is linked to the reduction in heart rate and blood pressure. And suddenly, we know, you put on your favorite piece of music and you can feel your shoulders just relaxing a bit, can't you? And so that you have this physiological response as well as this neurochemical response in the brain.
Absolutely. It's quite incredible. And we know as human beings, we're whole people. We can't just separate the brain and the body and our ears. The whole thing is affected. Even everything you've said, and also our immune systems can be boosted when we listen to music. That's amazing, isn't it? That just that. And
it's really nice to hear you talking about evidence, because this is something that I know lots of people who provide music in a dementia context say that they're often challenged on. And it's really lovely to hear somebody say, actually, there is loads of evidence out there. We know this really works. Not only do we feel it as human beings in our hearts and our bodies and our minds, but we just know that music works because there is this evidence base. And I think it's real testament to all those researchers who've really built that up. But it also makes the case then, when we're talking about why music should be a part of dementia care for those living with dementia, but also those caring for them, it just makes it unquestionable, and it takes it away from being that nice thing that we do to having real scientific outcomes. Whether it is the reduction in cortisol or the relaxation of muscles and being able to breathe more freely.
Absolutely. And also being able to get to sleep at night, having a better quality of sleep if you've listened to some appropriate music that's relaxing in some way. So
just hearing you talk then about sleep, it is remarkable actually to think about the ways in which music affects us in a positive way, both psychologically but also emotionally and physically. And it does have that ability to really transform your state of being.
It does, doesn't it? And music is so, it opens up our emotions, doesn't it, in a way that words sometimes don't. And I think, certainly when we talk about people with dementia, but also for all of us as human beings, sometimes someone can say something to us and it can be helpful or not helpful, but you listen to some music and it can just unlock memories, or it can unlock emotions and feelings, and it's so powerful, and that's such a universal thing for most people.
Absolutely. And actually that's a really lovely point, and it's just making me think as you were talking there about, it's something we spoke a lot about last week, and those who are watching tonight may remember this from the conversation that I had with Sue about the importance of personalization. Because as you talked then, Gemima, about the universality of these impacts, there is a nuance to that, isn't there, in terms of, the music that might uplift you and reduce your stress after a long day might be quite different to the music that I might listen to after a long, stressful day. Absolutely. And it's sort of having a real sense of that personal connection to the music and why it matters to you.
Absolutely. And sometimes people might say, well, what music should I listen to? I don't know. And really I would say, well, probably your brain will benefit from the music that you like. It's what do you like, what's your personal preference, what's your history with music, what maybe what music has helped you in the past. And also sometimes we can love a piece of music and then we associate it with a different experience. Maybe something else happens and that music was playing at that time, and it might suddenly then become a sadder experience. So it can change. One song that we've always loved, suddenly we might not love it anymore. And and I guess that's the thing, is that's about self-awareness as well, to kind of know, well, what music do I like, what would help me.
Yeah. And why is that song that used to be so uplifting for me and used to get me motivated, why is it not doing it for me anymore? What music do I need now? And I was just thinking back then about that question of, well, how do I get started with music if I'm looking for a particular style of music to help me unwind at the end of the day and get ready to try and get some sleep. And I think there are some concrete things people can look out for in the music. So, a slower tempo, nothing too busy in the melody. So you often want kind of long, lyrical, sweeping melodies that are gentle. You want sort of resonant harmonies as opposed to anything too discordant or, busy in the harmonies. And also quite a soft sound, I would have thought, when you're trying to relax, you don't want anything too tinny or anything too extreme in the sound world. So you want something that's sort of quite gentle, but you want that musical hug is what you want, really, don't you, from that kind of thing. And you can get that from any style, any genre of music. So it's really about, as you say, starting where you like your music and then building out from that, really, and thinking about it in how you think. It's really important to think about, what do you want this music to do for you in this moment?
Yes. Yeah. And especially if you're thinking, do you know what, I'm feeling really anxious, or I'm, and that's something, I'm stressed, I'm anxious, I'm wound up, then yes, absolutely, finding music that is relaxing and calming in some way will probably be a really good idea. And that's it's a good place to start. And also, I think if you can, if there are particular songs that you like, or pieces of music that you like, the research shows that if we choose those pieces of music ourselves, that has a really positive effect on the dopamine levels in our body. So that motivation, if we choose the music rather than someone else says, this is the music you need to listen to.
Exactly like that. And we've often talked about the right music at the right time in the right way, and having that sense of autonomy around what you're hearing and experiencing music, because, as you say, it has that very real effect in terms of dopamine. But there's just something empowering about having control over something, and actually in a world where you might not be able to control very much, thinking about a carer's capacity, then actually just having something that is your go-to thing that you are in full control of, whether you want to listen to that music, really loudly, or whether, it's what is selected on that playlist. There is that ability to have a sense of autonomy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that that's a really important part of it, in terms of resilience, in terms of how we cope with adversity in life. Having a sense of autonomy is really key, rather than someone else telling you, this is what you need to do, take this medication at this particular time, all good stuff. But actually having a bit of a sense of control and choice is so important.
Yes, exactly. And it's so fascinating just thinking about that. We've got, there's these really concrete kind of physiological things that we can see, in terms of reduced heart rate and blood pressure, but then right through to those more sort of softer experiences of autonomy and self and control. And it's just remarkable. And just sort of reflecting a little bit about how remarkable the breadth of impact music can have on your state of being. I still have yet to find anything that can have quite the same impact.
And also I totally agree with you. And just thinking from what you're saying about how powerful that can be, it can be so cathartic as well. Like sometimes people, family carers or people with dementia or anyone really who's going through a difficult time, you can feel that you're just so like a coil that's tightly wound and you're just trying to get through life. And sometimes people might say, well, tell me how you're feeling, but sometimes it's hard to get the words out or express it. But sometimes listening to upbeat music is great if you want to feel more motivated and more empowered and happier. But sometimes we just need a good cry. And sometimes it's okay to listen to music that might make you feel sad for a bit. It can be quite cathartic. And I know in my life when I've had, difficult times, and I've also kept going and felt fine. Actually, sometimes I've needed to have a good cry, and it's been really healthy. And music has been a really powerful way to just, sticking on a song that actually does bring up some sad memories has been all right. It's been okay. I haven't wanted to listen to it for too long, but just for a bit, just to have that sense of release and connection with how I'm really feeling on the inside. I think that's really important sometimes. And
absolutely.
Sorry, go on.
No, you go for it.
Well, but also, so a lot of carers talk about grief and how, they've got this sense of grief. They're dealing with someone with, who's aspects of their relationship they're losing, and that can stir up such feelings of grief. And we know when people are grieving that the really important thing that needs to happen in our brains is that we need to find new ways of kind of relating to the world as these changes are happening, and the new neural pathways that need to be formed in the brain as we're working out, what does life mean now? How am I going to cope with life now that this person isn't fulfilling that role in my life that they were? And that's really, really hard. And lots of people avoid and don't like to think about it because it's too painful. So those new neural pathways don't get formed, and that can be problematic. But music is such a lovely way, if it feels too painful to talk and think too deeply about this stuff, just to allow your brain to just start to experience some of that sadness at times, just so that the brain can start to heal and move forward, if that makes sense.
Makes absolute sense. And it was, as you were talking, I was thinking about music as a container, and that, which is why, music therapy exists, because actually sometimes that verbal expression of what's inside, it might have all sorts of connotations for somebody in terms of expressing it. It might be that it feels too overwhelming and scary and we're opening Pandora's box, or if I start crying, then actually I don't know that the tears are going to stop. There's a whole kind of, or they might feel shame or guilt about feeling certain things. And actually music can be a very safe place to put some of that stuff that's hard to express. So I certainly know I've done it myself when I've had a difficult time of it. I've put music on, and I haven't wanted to sit and cry in silence, but I've been able to put those tears to music, and it's almost like they provide a bit of a screen and some kind of container that lets you feel okay about not feeling okay, because actually you have to, we all are going to feel, going back to what you said at the beginning, we don't breeze through this life just on, good vibes only.
No.
Things happen to us, we're challenged, it's the human condition. And so having, that ability to turn to something like music that allows that expression of those feelings that can feel overwhelming, but knowing that actually music can hold some of that for you, can be incredibly reassuring when everything else might feel very uncertain.
I agree. It can give a bit of a framework, can't it? And like you said, I love that word container. Like it can just feel like, there's that I'm kind of following something. I'm following the music. The music is unlocking something. But yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah, it's really powerful, and then that sort of moves us on really nicely to this idea of music as a tool to transport. And we saw that a lot through the pandemic, didn't we, in terms of people not being able to go places, but it takes us to other times, other places, being with others, and it can do that job of being like a converter for us on a daily basis. If you're not feeling it in the morning, particularly, you're getting out of bed and you've got a whole great big long list of things to do, and you're just thinking, how am I going to do this? That motivation element of music can kick in, and it can really help bridge us into other places, in terms of our own internal state, but also just it can literally get us from one thing to the next as well within our days.
Yes, absolutely. That's amazing, isn't it? And thinking about the role of nostalgia in that as well, and especially for people with dementia, I think that's so amazing. And yeah, music can be so linked to memories, and it can transport us to another time. And
yeah. And so if the here and now is difficult, then actually through that experience of song or piece of music, you can be taken to a time when things felt easier and there was a different type of connection going on. And that's why we see these amazing things that happen in the moment with music, where somebody's eyes light up, suddenly it feels as though you're together in the here and now, having a really enjoyable, heartfelt, meaningful experience together.
Yeah, and we know, science has shown that when we listen to music with somebody else, like together as a social experience, so certainly for someone with dementia and their family care, if you're able to listen to music together, that can be a really bonding experience as well. And we know that there's a chemical in the brain that's released called oxytocin when that happens, and that's a really good bonding chemical. It makes us feel closer to each other. It can make us feel good. So again, that's really important.
Yeah, and we're social creatures. We need to feel connected to others, and music can be a really, really quick shortcut to having that immediate connection. It doesn't take long, does it? Once you put a piece of music on and you're there with somebody else, and there's a shared appreciation for that, that connection is suddenly really, really felt. It's quite palpable. It can be very tangible in the moment, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think oxytocin, I know it's certainly talked about a lot in the beginning of life, when there's a new baby, and it's really important that the baby bonds with the caregiver. But I think it's still really, really important when we're talking about dementia and end of life care. That ability to bond is so important, because again, it goes back to what you were saying about that grief and neural pathways. And if you've got oxytocin in the mix, you're much more likely to be able to lay down those new neural pathways when you're thinking about what the world might look like, as things are changing.
Absolutely. It helps us to feel safer when we, like you said, we're social creatures. We're meant to have strong relationships with each other. We tend to feel safer when we've got someone around us who cares. And so when that chemical is released, it helps us it kind of reinforces that feeling. And certainly a person with dementia as well, that's really, really key.
Yeah, well, that's such a big issue. So many people don't feel safe. Everything's so unknown, and their dementia may be such that it actually makes them really, really anxious. So having that oxytocin kick in is really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been really fascinating. I think we could talk for ages about it, because there's just so much in there in terms of, what's happening on that neurological level, the chemical level, the physiological, the emotional, the social. There's so much. But then that's the multifacetedness of music, isn't it? And that's why it's so exciting. Because there's so many elements to it, and there's so many reasons why it is good for us, and it is good for us. And I hope that this conversation has been really helpful for those viewing tonight. And I think Gemima and I would always say, wouldn't we, that it's really about your relationship with music and keeping it personal, and that what works this week might not work in a couple of months' time, but your relationship with music is something that's always there to be explored. And that's the joy of it. There is just so much music out there, and that you can always make new connections with music. You can always discover a new piece or a new song, or even a cover of a favorite song. I always find the joy in that, when you have a song that you absolutely love and you play constantly on repeat, but then you hear a new version of it, and it keeps your relationship with that song going. It's really exciting. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you for joining us this evening. I've really enjoyed learning from you and just being invigorated by what music does for us, and it was really nice to think about that with you. And please do leave us your songs and your music in the comments so we can include it in the playlist. But Gemima, are there any final words you'd like to add?
I guess as a psychologist, I'm always really keen that people, when people come for therapy, or they want some help about a problem, I suppose I'm always very aware that people who get the most help, or that as in can see the most change when they're going through really tough times, are people who are psychologically minded. And by that, what I mean isn't that they have this amazing psychological knowledge or anything like that, but it's the understanding that little things that we can do can make a difference to how we feel. Little things ways that we can think differently or behave or try different things can make a difference to our circumstances. And so I would just ask people to, if anything that we've talked about tonight has been interesting, to give it a go. And as you said, Grace, it's very individual. It's we can't say this will definitely be the way forward for you, but it might well help, and it does help a lot of people. So give it a try.
Do you know, Gemima, that's fantastic, because it was a theme that emerged last week, was give it a go, and it's lovely that that's actually come up again tonight. So on that note, go and give it a go. Use music in those lovely little ways that Gemima was describing. And if you did miss last week's and you'd like to catch up on it, you can catch up on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And next week we're going to be talking with Sue Hines, the head of services at Dementia Care Accounts, for our next session, which is all about My Life, the musical. So we'll be looking at how our childhood, our cultural and social associations form our own soundtrack and help us and the person we care for to reminisce and recall both positive and negative memories, as we were just talking about then, but also connects us in the here and now. So do join us next Monday at 7:00 for that, and hopefully we'll see you then. But thank you again so much, Gemima. That was really
thank you, Grace.
Thank you. All right, thanks everybody. Bye.
Bye.